Welcome to this journey through one of America's most haunting unidentified persons, cases a mystery that defies explanation and challenges everything we think we know about identity, memory, and the fragility of human existence. Tell us where you're watching from now, because this story will move you in a way few other accounts can, compelling you to consider how easily a life can vanish into silence, how thoroughly a person can be erased from the world. We're about to delve into a mystery that has consumed investigators, genealogists, and amateur sleuths for over half a century, where a woman with no past appeared in one of America's most isolated regions and left behind nothing but questions so profound that they continue to haunt everyone who encounters them. Her death was recorded, her body was buried, but her name, her origins, her entire existence before one fateful day. Gone. It was the year 1969. Neil Armstrong had just walked on the moon, humanity reaching heights previously unimaginable. Woodstock defined a generation. Vietnam protests convulsed American cities. The world was changing at unprecedented speed, becoming more connected, more documented, more known than ever before in human history. Yet in the mountains of North Carolina, a woman would arrive who seemed to exist outside of history itself. To understand this story, you must first understand the landscape that would become both stage and witness to one of the 20th century's most perplexing mysteries. Burke County, North Carolina, nestles in the Appalachian foothills where the Blue Ridge Mountains begin their ancient rise toward the sky. These are old mountains among the oldest on Earth, worn smooth by hundreds of millions of years of wind and rain, their peaks softened but their valleys deep and secretive. In 1969, this region existed in a strange temporal pocket, caught between the rapid modernization sweeping across America and traditions that stretched back generations, unchanged and unchanging. The landscape itself seems designed for mystery. Dense forests of oak, hickory, and pine cloak the mountainsides in shadows even at midday. Fog rolls through the valleys like living things, obscuring roads and landmarks, transforming the familiar into the alien. Creeks cut through rock that remembers when these mountains touch the clouds, their waters cold and clear and murmuring secrets in a language older than words. The communities here in the late 1960s were tight, knit, suspicious of outsiders, protective of their own. Families had lived on the same land for 2 centuries or more. Everyone knew everyone. A stranger in these parts was noticed immediately, discussed, evaluated. The old ways persisted here. Herb women who knew cures passed down through whispered instruction, stories of haints and portents told on front porches as dusk settled, a belief that some knowledge shouldn't be written down, only remembered. Route 18 wound through this landscape like a thread through fabric, connecting small towns and isolated homesteads. In September 1969, as summer reluctantly surrendered to autumn, this highway would become the setting for an appearance so inexplicable that it continues to defy every attempt at rational explanation. The weather that September had been typical for the season. Warm days cooling into crisp nights, the first hints of color touching the leaves at higher elevations. Morning mists clung to the valleys, burning off slowly under a sun that seemed reluctant to fully commit its heat. It was the kind of weather that made people reflective, contemplative, aware of time's passage and nature's cycles. On September 14, 1969, a Sunday morning when many locals were preparing for church services, something impossible happened on Route 18, just south of Morganton. The first person to see her was Harold Jenkins, a local farmer driving to his sister's house for Sunday dinner. The time was approximately 10:47 a.m. Harold would remember this detail because he'd checked his watch, worried about arriving late. What he saw made him slam on his brakes so hard that his truck fishtailed slightly on the asphalt. A woman stood in the middle of Route 18. Not on the shoulder, not walking along the road. Asterisk in asterisk, the middle of it, perfectly still, as if she'd materialized there from nothing. Harold would later tell investigators that his first thought was that she'd been in an accident, that he'd find a wrecked car nearby. But there was no car, no debris, no tire marks. Just the woman, standing motionless in the center of the road, her posture suggesting neither distress nor awareness of danger, simply standing, as if waiting for something. He pulled his truck to the shoulder and got out, calling to her. She didn't respond, didn't turn her head, didn't acknowledge his presence in any way. Harold approached cautiously, the way you might approach a wild animal, uncertain and increasingly uneasy. Up close, the woman's appearance would become the subject of countless reports, interviews, and investigations. She appeared to be in her late 20s to early 30s, though estimates would vary. Her hair was dark brown, shoulder length, neatly combed but unstyled. Her face was unremarkable in the way that made it difficult to describe. No distinctive features, no scars or birthmarks visible, just an ordinary face that would disappear into any crowd. But her clothes were wrong. She wore a dark blue dress that Harold would describe as old-fashioned, like something from an earlier time, but not costume. Why? The fabric was heavy, well made, but the style was indeterminate, not clearly vintage, not modern, just. Asterisk off asterisk. Her shoes were simple black flats, worn but cared for, no purse, no jewelry, no watch, nothing that might identify her. "Ma'am," Harold called as he approached. "Ma'am, are you all right? Do you need help?" The woman turned to look at him then, and Harold would never forget her eyes. They weren't frightened or confused. He told the sheriff later, they were just empty, like she was looking through me at something else entirely, like I wasn't really there. She said nothing. Harold tried again, speaking slowly, assuming perhaps she didn't speak English or was in shock. "Are you hurt? Is there someone I can call? Where did you come from?" The woman's lips moved then, forming words without sound. Harold leaned closer, trying to hear, but there was nothing. Just the movement of her mouth, deliberate but voiceless, as if she'd forgotten how to produce sound or was speaking in a frequency humans couldn't detect. That's when Harold noticed her hands. They were perfectly clean, not just clean, pristine. Nails trimmed and neat, skin unblemished. These weren't the hands of someone who'd been in an accident or walked any distance through the surrounding forest. These were hands that had been carefully tended, recently washed, almost unnaturally perfect. Harold felt a chill despite the warm morning air. Behind him, another car approached Sheriff Deputy Marcus Brennan, who happened to be heading into town. He pulled over when he saw Harold's truck and the scene unfolding in the road. "Everything all right here, Harold?" Brennan called, getting out of his patrol car. "Found this woman just standing in the road, Marcus. She won't talk, won't say where she came from. I think something's wrong." Brennan approached, his training kicking in. He scanned the area for vehicles, for evidence of an accident or crime. Nothing. Just the empty road, the watching forest, and this silent woman in the middle of it all. "Ma'am, I'm Deputy Brennan. Can you tell me your name?" Silence. "Do you know where you are? Can you tell me what happened?" The woman's eyes moved to Brennan's face, that same empty gaze, looking without seeing. Her lips moved again, words forming but no sound emerging, as if she existed behind invisible glass that blocked all her attempts at communication. Brennan would later report that he felt profoundly disturbed by the encounter, though he couldn't articulate why. It wasn't that she was injured or threatening. he told investigators. It was that she seemed impossible, like she shouldn't exist, but did anyway. Like she'd stepped out of a photograph from another time and place, and couldn't find her way back. He tried several more times to communicate, asking her name, where she'd come from, if she needed medical attention. Each question met with the same response: those moving lips, that voiceless attempt at speech, those empty, distant eyes. Finally, Brennan made a decision. "Ma'am, I'm going to take you to the hospital. We'll get you checked out. Make sure you're not hurt." The woman didn't resist as he gently guided her to his patrol car. She moved mechanically, as if her body was present, but her consciousness elsewhere. She climbed into the back seat without hesitation, sitting perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead at nothing. As Brennan pulled away, Harold Jenkins stood by his truck, watching them go. He felt something he couldn't name, not fear exactly, but a deep unease that would stay with him for weeks. That night, he would dream of the woman standing in the road, her lips moving in silence, trying to tell him something crucial that he could never hear. The mystery had begun. At Burke County Hospital, the woman was examined by Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a young physician who'd recently joined the staff after completing her residency at Duke University. Dr. Chen's initial examination would provide the first real documentation of the woman's condition, and would raise more questions than it answered. Physical examination revealed a woman in apparent good health, no injuries, no signs of trauma, vital signs normal. Approximately 5'6", a tall, 130 pounds, with dark brown hair and brown eyes. Age estimated at 28-32 years old. Hands showed no calluses or work-related marks. Feet had no blisters or injuries. Consistent with extended walking, teeth were in good condition, showing evidence of professional dental care. But when Dr. Chen attempted to take a medical history, she encountered the same impenetrable silence that had faced Harold Jenkins and Deputy Brennan. "Can you tell me your name?" Dr. Chen asked gently. The woman's lips moved, forming words, but no sound emerged. Her face showed no distress at this inability to speak, just that same distant, empty expression, as if she was only partially present in the examination room. Dr. Chen tried writing implements, paper and pencil, hoping the woman might communicate in writing. The woman took the pencil, but simply held it, staring at the paper without writing anything, not unable, unwilling, or perhaps unaware of what was expected. A speech therapist was called. The examination revealed no physical reason for woman's muteness. Her vocal cords appeared normal, no paralysis, no injury to the mouth, throat, or relevant neural pathways. Physically, she should be capable of speech, but she remained silent. A psychiatrist was consulted. Dr. Robert Hammond, who'd served in World War II and had extensive experience with trauma cases. His evaluation would become a key document in the case file, though it offered more observations than conclusions. Patient presence as conscious and alert. He wrote in his notes, but demonstrates what appears to be profound dissociation from her environment. She responds to physical stimuli, will move if guided, will take offered food and eat mechanically. However, she shows no signs of recognition, no emotional response to questioning or attempts at engagement. Most unusual is the persistent attempt at vocalization without sound production. This does not appear to be voluntary muteness or selective mutism. Rather, the patient seems to be attempting to communicate, but cannot produce audible speech, despite no physical impediment. The psychological mechanism behind this presentation is unclear. Dr. Hammond noted something else, something that sent a chill through everyone who read his report. Patient's effect is completely flat, showing neither fear nor comfort, neither confusion nor recognition. It is as if she exists in a state between consciousness and absence, present but not participating in reality. I have never encountered a presentation quite like this in 23 years of practice. While the medical examinations continued, Deputy Brennan and Sheriff Edward Morrison began their investigation into the woman's identity. In 1969, this meant physical legwork, checking with neighboring counties, reviewing missing persons reports, conducting interviews with locals to see if anyone recognized her. The Burke County Sheriff's Department was small but competent. Sheriff Morrison had served in the position for 15 years and knew every family in the county. If this woman was local, he would recognize her. He didn't. Missing persons reports from surrounding counties yielded nothing. No one matching her description had been reported missing in North Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, Georgia, or South Carolina. The FBI National Database, still relatively rudimentary in 1969, contained no matches. Her fingerprints were taken and sent to state and federal authorities. Nothing. This woman had never been arrested, never been fingerprinted for employment, never existed in any official database anywhere in the United States. Her photograph was distributed to local media. The Morganton News Herald ran her picture on the front page. Unidentified woman found on Route 18, sheriff seeks public help. Television stations in Charlotte and Asheville broadcast her image during evening news programs. The response was immediate but ultimately fruitless. Dozens of people called claiming to recognize her, but each lead evaporated upon investigation. She looked like someone's cousin, someone's old neighbor, someone glimpsed at a bus station 3 years ago, but none of these identifications could be verified. None led anywhere. Days passed, then weeks. Woman remained at Burke County Hospital, housed in a private room under observation. She ate when fed, slept at appropriate times, maintained basic hygiene when guided, but she showed no improvement in communication, no signs of returning awareness, no clues to her identity. Nurses reported strange occurrences. The woman would sometimes stand at her window, looking out at the mountains, her lips moving in that silent speech for hours. At night, staff would hear footsteps in her room, the sound of someone pacing. But when they checked, she would be lying in bed, perfectly still, staring at the ceiling with those empty eyes. One nurse, Sarah Atkins, reported a particularly unsettling encounter. She'd entered the woman's room at 3 a.m. during routine rounds and found her sitting upright in bed, hands folded in her lap, staring directly at the door as if she'd been waiting. As Sarah approached, the woman's lips began moving rapidly, forming words at an increasingly frantic pace. Still, without sound, her eyes locked on Sarah's face with sudden intensity. It was like she was desperately trying to tell me something. Sarah told investigators later, like she had this urgent message, but couldn't make me hear it. I tried to calm her, told her it was all right, but she just kept going, her mouth moving faster and faster, until suddenly she just stopped, closed her mouth, laid back down, and went still. I couldn't sleep the rest of that night. Dr. Chen became increasingly fascinated and frustrated by the case. She spent hours with the woman, trying different approaches, showing her pictures, elicit recognition, playing music to stimulate emotional response, attempting hypnosis to access buried memories. Nothing worked. The woman remained locked behind her silence, unreachable. It's if she's a shell, Dr. Chen wrote in her notes, a perfect physical body with no interior life animating it. But that's not quite right either, because something asterisk is asterisk there. I can see it in her eyes sometimes, a flicker, like someone locked in a distant room, trying to signal through a window. But I can't reach her. I don't think anyone can. 6 weeks after her discovery, the woman remained unidentified, and the case began attracting national attention. Journalists from major newspapers arrived in Morganton. Television crews set up equipment outside the hospital. The story had everything that captured public imagination: mystery, impossibility, the unsettling suggestion that a person could simply appear with no past, no identity, no connection to the known world. Theories proliferated. Some suggested she was a victim of trafficking or kidnapping, her memory destroyed by trauma, but there were no reports of kidnapped women matching her description, and her physical condition showed no signs of abuse or captivity. Others proposed amnesia caused by accident or illness, yet no one had reported an accident in the area, and her medical examinations revealed no head trauma or neurological damage consistent with memory loss. The more paranormal-minded suggested she'd traveled through time or between dimensions, materializing on Route 18 from elsewhere or else when *. These theories were dismissed by officials but gained traction in certain circles, especially given the woman's seemingly anachronistic clothing and her impossible appearance in the middle of an empty road. One investigator, a retired FBI agent named Thomas Whitfield, who'd become interested in the case, proposed a darker theory. He suggested the woman might be the victim of a sophisticated brainwashing or mind control experiment, possibly related to the CIA-known MKUltra program. The complete erasure of identity, the inability to communicate, he argued, these could be the results of psychological manipulation or drug-induced trauma. She might not remember her name because someone deliberately made her forget. This theory sparked official denials but couldn't be entirely dismissed. The 1960s had seen numerous revelations about government experiments on unwitting subjects. Could this woman be another victim, deliberately erased and discarded? No evidence supported the theory, but none contradicted it either. By late November, 3 months after her appearance, the case had reached an impasse. Every investigative avenue had been exhausted. Every theory tested. The woman remained nameless, historyless, locked in her impenetrable silence. Then everything changed. On the morning of November 23, 1969, a Sunday, ironically the same day of the week she'd first appeared, a nurse named Jennifer Holloway entered the woman's room for the morning medication round and immediately knew something was wrong. The woman sat upright in bed, her posture rigid, her eyes wide and fixed on the window. Her mouth was moving in that familiar silent speech, but faster than anyone had seen before, almost frantically. Her hands clutched the bed sheets with white, knuckled intensity. "Ma'am." Jennifer approached cautiously. "Are you all right?" The woman's head turned slowly, mechanically, until she was looking directly at Jennifer. And for the first time in over 2 months, her eyes weren't empty. They were filled with something, not quite recognition, but awareness, terror, desperate urgency. Her lips formed words, and for just a moment, one crystalline instant that Jennifer would never forget, a sound emerged, not speech exactly, but a whisper so faint it barely registered as sound at all. "Find me." 2 words, the only words anyone would ever hear her speak. Jennifer stood frozen, uncertain she'd actually heard anything. What did you say?" But the moment had passed. The woman's eyes emptied again, her mouth stopped moving, and she slumped back against the pillows, suddenly limp, as if whatever brief spark of consciousness had animated her had been extinguished. Jennifer ran for Dr. Chen. When they returned moments later, the woman appeared to be sleeping peaceful, calm, her breathing slow and regular. Dr. Chen examined her thoroughly but found nothing unusual, vital signs normal, no indication of distress or medical emergency. "What exactly did she say?" Dr. Chen asked. "Find me." Jennifer replied, "I'm certain." She said, "Find me." Dr. Chen documented the incident carefully, noting both the utterance and the return to unresponsive state. But what did it mean? Find ***? Who***? Find the woman herself. Was she asking them to discover her identity, or was she asking them to find someone else, someone connected to her mystery? The phrase "find me" would be analyzed, debated, and interpreted in countless ways. Over the following years, some saw it as a cry for help from someone trapped in her own mind, unable to break through. Others interpreted it as evidence of dissociative identity disorder, a fragment of her true self trying to communicate. Still others saw it as confirmation of more paranormal explanations, a consciousness displaced from its proper body, begging to be returned to wherever it belonged. But the woman offered no further clarification. She never spoke again. The incident marked a turning point in another way. The woman's physical health, which had remained stable throughout her hospitalization, began to deteriorate. She ate less, slept more, became increasingly listless and unresponsive. By early December, she'd lost 15 pounds and showed signs of what Dr. Chen described as passive decline, as if she's simply choosing to fade away. Medical interventions had limited effect. The woman wasn't actively dying, but she wasn't living either, just slowly, inexorably receding from physical existence. On the night of December 17, 1969, 3 months and 3 days after her appearance on Route 18, the unidentified woman died. The official cause of death was listed as organ failure secondary to unknown causes, no specific disease, no identifiable medical explanation. She simply stopped living. The night nurse who discovered her body, an experienced woman named Margaret Davis, who'd worked in hospitals for 30 years later, reported something that never made it into official records. When she'd entered the room at 2:47 a.m. for routine vitals check, she'd found the woman sitting upright in bed, eyes open, lips moving in that silent speech. But the vital signs monitor showed no heartbeat, no respiration. According to the equipment, the woman was already dead. Margaret approached, calling for assistance, and as she reached the bedside, the woman's eyes moved to focus on her face. One final look, not empty this time, but filled with something Margaret would describe as overwhelming sadness, like she was apologizing for something. Then the woman's eyes closed, her body settled back against the pillows, and she was still. Margaret never reported this officially, fearing it would make her sound irrational or imaginative. But she told her family, and years later, she told researchers who were investigating the case. "I've seen a lot of deaths," she said in a 1992 interview, "but I'd never seen anything like that. She was dead before I walked in that room. I'm certain of it, but somehow she stayed long enough to look at me, to say goodbye, maybe, or to apologize for leaving us with nothing but questions." The woman's death should have ended the mystery. Instead, it deepened it. An autopsy was performed by Dr. Raymond Foster, the county medical examiner, assisted by a pathologist from Charlotte. What they found, or more accurately, what they didn't find, only added to the enigma surrounding the woman's identity. The autopsy revealed a body in generally good health at time of death, showing no signs of chronic disease, drug use, or long-term medical conditions. No surgical scars except for a small mark on her lower abdomen, consistent with an appendectomy performed years earlier. Dental examination showed professional care but no distinctive work that might help identify her through dental records. But there were anomalies. Her organs showed what Dr. Foster described as unusual patterns of tissue development, suggesting possible exposure to unknown environmental factors or substances. Her brain tissue revealed no obvious damage, but cellular examination showed abnormalities that the pathologist couldn't classify. Not disease, not injury, just differentness. Most puzzling was a finding in her bone marrow that suggested she'd been exposed to radiation at some point in her life, but not the pattern typically seen in cancer patients or atomic bomb survivors. The exposure pattern was unusual, unlike anything in the pathologist's experience. It's as if she came from somewhere with different environmental conditions. The pathologist noted in his report, though that's obviously impossible. Tissue samples were preserved for further analysis, though the technology of 1969 was limited. Those samples remain in storage today, occasionally subjected to new testing as forensic technology advances. So far, they've revealed nothing conclusive. With no name, no family, and no one to claim the body, the woman was buried in Burke County Memorial Gardens on December 22, 1969, just 3 days before Christmas. The burial was attended by Sheriff Morrison, Dr. Chen, several nurses who'd cared for her, and approximately 40 townspeople who'd followed the case and felt compelled to ensure she didn't go to her grave alone. Her grave marker reads simply, *** Jane Doe ***, September 14, 1969, December 17, 1969, ***, find me, ***, Sheriff Morrison insisted on including her only spoken words, believing they might someday provide a clue. The headstone was paid for by community donation, the town's way of acknowledging that even nameless strangers deserve dignity in death. Rev. Thomas Martin, who conducted the brief service, later reflected, "I've performed hundreds of funerals in my 40 years of ministry, but that one haunts me. How do you eulogize someone when you know nothing about them? I spoke about the sanctity of every human life, the tragedy of anonymity, the hope that in death she found the peace she couldn't find in life. But my words felt hollow. She deserved better. She deserved her name, but her name remained elusive. After the burial, the investigation theoretically continued, but with no new leads and competing demands on limited resources, it gradually lost momentum. The case file remained open, but active investigation ceased. The woman became another unsolved mystery, filed away with countless others, except some people couldn't let it go. Dr. Chen in particular became obsessed with the case. For years afterward, she continued researching, following up on leads, consulting with colleagues about possible explanations for the woman's condition and death. She maintained meticulous files of every detail, every theory, every scrap of information related to the case. In a 1985 interview, Dr. Chen said, "I treated her for 3 months and learned nothing about her except that she existed. As a physician, I'm trained to solve puzzles, to find causes, to understand symptoms and connect them to underlying conditions. But this woman, she defied understanding. I think about her often, wonder who she was, where she came from, what happened to her. Someone, somewhere, must have known her, loved her, missed her. But we never found them, and they never found us." Thomas Whitfield, the retired FBI agent, continued investigating until his death in 2003. His files, donated to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, contain thousands of pages of research interviews with witnesses, analysis of the clothing she wore, attempts to trace the fabric and construction of her dress to specific manufacturers or time periods, comparisons with missing persons cases from around the world. None of it led anywhere definitive. Whitfield did establish some interesting facts. The dress the woman wore was hand-sewn, not manufactured, using fabric that was common in the 1950s, but would have been unusual by 1969. The stitching pattern suggested someone with professional seamstress skills. Shoes were mass-produced, but from a style discontinued in 1964. These details suggested the woman had either dressed deliberately in older clothing or came from circumstances where such clothing was normal, perhaps an isolated religious community, or someone living deliberately outside modern society. But without knowing who she was, these details remained contextless, interesting but ultimately unhelpful. Over the decades since her death, The case of the woman with no name has attracted increasingly intense interest from researchers, true crime enthusiasts, and paranormal investigators. Each brings their own theories, their own interpretations of the available evidence. One persistent theory focuses on the woman's silent speech. Linguistic experts who have reviewed the footage, yes. The hospital filmed her several times, hoping visual documentation might provide clues, have attempted to read her lips and determine what language she was speaking. The results are contradictory and unsettling. Some linguists believe she was speaking English but mouthing words that didn't correspond to any intelligible sentences. Random syllables strung together in patterns that mimicked speech without containing meaning. Others argue she was speaking a real but unidentified language, possibly a rare dialect or even a constructed language. One researcher claimed she was speaking backwards, her words making sense only when reversed, though this theory has been largely dismissed. The most disturbing analysis came from Dr. Patricia Williamson, a linguistics professor at Duke University, who studied the footage extensively in 2001. She concluded, "The woman appears to be speaking English, and if you read her lips carefully, you can make out phrases. But they don't make linear sense. It's as if she's speaking from multiple time periods simultaneously, past, present, future, with her words referring to events and contexts we can't access. One moment she seems to be describing something from her childhood. The next, she's referencing things that haven't happened yet. It's linguistic chaos, which might explain why no sound emerged. Perhaps her mind was attempting to vocalize multiple timelines at once, and the contradiction prevented sound production. Dr. Williamson's theory sounds absurd, but it's been taken seriously by some researchers, particularly when combined with another strange aspect of the case, the predictions. Several people who interacted with the woman reported experiencing vivid dreams in the weeks following her death. In these dreams, the woman would speak clearly, audibly delivering messages that seemed like nonsense at the time, but later proved eerily prescient. Sheriff Morrison dreamed of the woman telling him about a fire. 3 weeks later, his barn burned down in the exact manner she'd described, a fire started by faulty wiring in a location he'd never have thought vulnerable. Dr. Chen dreamed of the woman warning her about the sick child in room 107. There was no room 107 in Burke County Hospital, but 2 years later, Dr. Chen transferred to a larger hospital in Charlotte. And her first night there, she was called to emergency room 107 to treat a child with symptoms that exactly matched what the dream woman had described. The child survived because Dr. Chen, remembering the dream, knew exactly what to do. Nurse Sarah Atkins dreamed of the woman speaking about water rising where it shouldn't. 5 years after the woman's death, Sarah's basement flooded due to a burst pipe in a wall. The specific wall the dream woman had indicated, coincidence, probably, but the pattern of prophetic dreams reported by those who'd been close to the case is statistically unusual enough to warrant attention. Over 24 people have reported similar experiences over the years, each involving the woman speaking clearly in dreams about future events that subsequently occurred. This has led to speculation that the woman wasn't suffering from a medical or psychological condition at all, but was somehow experiencing time non-linearly, seeing past, present, and future simultaneously in a way that made normal communication impossible. Her silent speech, according to this theory, was her attempt to communicate while her consciousness existed in multiple temporal states at once. It's a theory that sounds like science fiction, but it's no more impossible than the reality. A woman appeared from nowhere, existed briefly without identity, and vanished into death, leaving only questions. Then there are the sightings. Since 1969, there have been over 100 reported sightings of a woman matching her description in various locations. Around Burke County, these reports follow a pattern. The woman appears standing in or beside a road, wearing the same dark blue dress, staring at passing vehicles. Witnesses who stop to help find her unresponsive, unable, or unwilling to communicate, and when they turn away to get a phone to flag down another car, she vanishes. Most of these reports can be dismissed as hoaxes, mistakes, or power of suggestion, but some are harder to explain. In 1973, a state trooper named David Walsh responded to reports of a woman standing on Route 18 near the exact spot where she'd first appeared. He found her there, matching the description perfectly, and approached to offer assistance. She looked at him, her lips moving in silent speech, and he felt what he described as absolute cold, like standing in a freezer, except it was June and 90 degrees outside. He radioed for backup, keeping his eyes on the woman. When he looked away for just a moment to respond to the radio dispatcher, she was gone, vanished. Walsh searched the area thoroughly and found nothing. No footprints, no evidence she'd ever been there, except for one detail that made him file an official report. In the spot where she'd been standing, the asphalt was cold to the touch, frost forming on the surface despite the summer heat. In 1989, a family driving through Burke County photographed what they thought was a hitchhiker on Route 18. When they developed the film, the image showed a woman in a dark blue dress standing in the middle of the road. The family insisted they hadn't seen anyone when they were there. The woman appeared only in the photograph, not to their direct observation. The photograph has been analyzed extensively. It shows no signs of double exposure or manipulation. The woman in image matches descriptions of the original Jane Doe, but how she appeared in a photograph without being visible to the people taking it remains unexplained. These sightings continue to the present day. As recently as 2023, a truck driver reported seeing a woman matching the description on Route 18 at 2 a.m. He stopped, approached, and she looked at him with what he described as the saddest eyes I've ever seen, like she was carrying the weight of the entire world. He asked if she needed help, and for just a moment he heard a whisper, "Find me." The same words Jennifer Holloway heard in 1969. When he turned to his truck to call for help, she was gone. The case gained new attention in the early 2000s, with advances in forensic technology, particularly DNA analysis and genetic genealogy. Investigators hoped that modern science might finally provide the answers that traditional investigation couldn't. In 2008, Burke County Sheriff's Department, now under the leadership of Sheriff Angela Thompson, authorized DNA extraction from the preserved tissue samples. The DNA was successfully extracted and profiled, and the results only deepened the mystery. The woman's DNA showed she was of predominantly European descent, with genetic markers suggesting ancestry from the British Isles and possibly Central Europe. Nothing unusual there, but when her DNA was run through genealogical databases, CODIS, Interpol databases, privately held genealogy sites, no matches were found. Not no asterisk close asterisk matches, no matches at all. Everyone has genetic relatives. Everyone's DNA connects to family lineages that spread across populations. But this woman's DNA profile was so isolated that it suggested she had no living relatives within detectable range. Not cousins, not distant relations, nothing. It's statistically almost impossible, said Dr. Margaret Howell, the forensic geneticist who analyzed the results. Even people from isolated populations have genetic connections to others. But this woman's DNA is like an island, connected to human genetic patterns generally, but with no specific family ties. It suggests either an incredibly isolated genetic lineage or something I don't have an explanation for. Further analysis revealed something else unusual. The woman's DNA showed patterns suggesting she'd been exposed to environmental conditions that didn't match anywhere in North America. Certain genetic markers used to determine geographic ancestry suggested possible exposure to environments found in specific regions, but those regions contradicted each other. Some markers suggested Mediterranean climate adaptation, others suggested Northern European conditions, still others suggested she'd lived in high-altitude environments. It's as if her ancestors came from multiple geographic locations simultaneously. Dr. Howell noted, which doesn't make biological sense. Populations adapt to their environments over generations, but her genetic markers suggest adaptation to contradictory environments. I can't explain it. The DNA profile was uploaded to every available database: GD, Match, Family Tree DNA, 23, and ME's law enforcement database, Ancestry. Com's matching system. Investigators hoped for even a distant cousin match that might provide a starting point for building a family tree. Years passed, nothing. In 2019, on the 50th anniversary of her appearance and death, investigative genetic genealogist Barbara Rave Enter, famous for helping identify the Golden State Killer, volunteered to take on the case. She spent 18 months working with the woman's DNA, using cutting-edge techniques that had solved numerous cold cases. She found nothing. This is the only case in my career where I've encountered a complete dead end, Rave Enter admitted in a 2021 interview. I've identified victims from the 1950s using degraded DNA and distant relatives. I've built family trees from the most fragmentary genetic evidence. But this woman, it's as if she has no genetic history, no family, no connections. She's a genetic ghost. Rave Enter did note one possibility. If this woman came from an extremely isolated community, perhaps a religious sect that had been closed off from the outside world for multiple generations, she might have genetic markers we simply haven't encountered before because that population has never been sampled. But even then, we should find some asterisk connections. The complete absence of matches is unprecedented in my experience. The 50th anniversary also brought renewed media attention. Podcasts dedicated episodes to the case. True crime television shows produced specials. Investigators were interviewed. The case file was digitized and made partially available to researchers and the public. New witnesses came forward, people who'd been children in 1969, but remembered hearing their parents discuss the strange woman, or who claimed their family members had information they'd never shared with authorities. Most of these leads proved unhelpful, but a few added interesting details to the overall picture. One particularly intriguing account came from Martha Henderson, who was 16 in 1969 and lived with her grandmother near Route 18. Martha reported that 3 nights before the woman's appearance, she and her grandmother witnessed something unusual. It was late, maybe 11 p.m., Martha recalled. My grandmother and I were sitting on the porch. She had insomnia, and I'd often keep her company. We heard this sound, like humming or vibrating, coming from the direction of the road. Then we saw lights, not like car headlights, but strange lights that moved in patterns through the trees. My grandmother got very quiet, very serious. She made me go inside and said we shouldn't talk about what we'd seen. Martha's grandmother died in 1974, so there's no way to verify her account. But Martha insisted the story was true, and interestingly, 2 other residents reported similar lights and sounds in the nights preceding the woman's appearance reports that had been dismissed at the time as unrelated to the case. Could these lights have had something to do with the woman's appearance? Or was this simply the retrofitting of mysterious occurrences onto an already mysterious event? creating patterns where none existed. Investigator David Martinez, who took over the case in 2015, pursued every angle. He interviewed everyone still living who'd had contact with the woman. He reviewed the medical records with modern forensic psychologists and neurologists. He consulted with experts in rare diseases, dissociative disorders, and trauma responses. He explored theories ranging from the mundane to the bizarre. Every explanation has problems. Martinez said in 2022, "If she was fleeing abuse or trafficking, where did she come from? Why did no one report her missing? If she had amnesia from injury, where are the signs of that injury? If she was part of an isolated community, why couldn't we find that community? If she was a victim of government experiments, where's the evidence? Every theory hits a wall. It's like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces don't belong to any known picture." Martinez did uncover one detail that previous investigators had missed: a report from 1968, the year before the woman appeared, of a similar incident in Virginia. A young woman had been found standing beside a road in Tazewell County, unable or unwilling to communicate, wearing clothing described as old-fashioned. She'd been taken to a local hospital, where she'd remained for 6 weeks before dying of unknown causes. Could this be the same woman? Had she appeared a year earlier, died, and somehow appeared again in 1969? The timing seemed impossible, but Martinez obtained records from the Virginia case. The physical description matched. The circumstances were eerily similar. But the Virginia woman had been buried in a pauper's grave, and when Martinez attempted to have her remains exhumed for DNA comparison, he discovered the cemetery had been relocated in 1975. The remains had supposedly been moved to a new location, but records were incomplete. Despite extensive searching, the Virginia Jane Doe's remains could not be located. Another dead end. What makes this case particularly haunting isn't just the mystery of the woman's identity, but what it reveals about the nature of identity itself, and how fragile our connections to the known world truly are. In the modern era, we take identity for granted. We have birth certificates, social security numbers, digital footprints that span our entire lives. We're photographed constantly, documented obsessively. The idea that someone could simply not exist in any records seems impossible. Yet this woman didn't exist. Despite living in 1969, a time when record-keeping was already comprehensive, when missing persons reports were standardized, when photograph identification was routine, she left no trace backward into the past. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a sociologist who studied the case for her doctoral dissertation in 2016, argued that the woman's anonymity reveals troubling truths about society's invisible populations. Even today, people fall through cracks in our identification systems. Homeless individuals, victims of trafficking, people fleeing domestic violence, those living in extreme poverty or isolation, they can't disappear from the documented world. This woman might represent an extreme example, but she's not as unique as we'd like to believe. At any given time, there are people living in America who don't officially exist. The difference is that most of them aren't found standing mysteriously in the middle of roads. But Mitchell's explanation, while sociologically sound, doesn't account for the specific circumstances of this case. The pristine hands, the sudden appearance on an empty road, the complete absence of genetic relatives, the medical anomalies, the inexplicable death. Some researchers have approached the case from philosophical rather than investigative perspectives, asking not, who was she, but what does her existence mean? Philosophy professor Dr. James Whittaker wrote extensively about the case in his 2018 book, The Woman Who Wasn't There: Identity, memory, and existence. He argued that the woman represents what he calls ontological impossibility, a person who exists physically but not socially, who has being but not identity. We define ourselves through relationships, through memory, through our place in social networks. Whitaker wrote, "We exist because others remember us, because our actions ripple out into the world and affect others, because we're embedded in systems of meaning." But this woman had none of that. She existed in pure physical form without the social construction that makes existence meaningful. In a sense, she was more of a philosophical question than a person. What does it mean to exist if no one knows you exist? It's a chilling thought, that you could be physically present, alive and breathing and conscious, but somehow disconnected from the entire web of human relationships and memory that gives existence meaning. The case has also attracted attention from quantum physicists interested in consciousness and the nature of reality. Dr. Ellen Morris, a theoretical physicist at MIT, has proposed what she calls the displacement hypothesis. Quantum mechanics tells us that particles can exist in multiple states simultaneously, in what we call superposition. Dr. Morris explained in a 2020 lecture, "What if consciousness can occasionally do something similar? What if this woman somehow became displaced from her proper position in spacetime, not time travel exactly, but a kind of quantum drift that separated her from her context? She's physically present but informationally absent, existing in our reality but disconnected from her own. The inability to speak might be because the information about how to form coherent speech, embedded in her personal timeline, was no longer accessible. She's trying to access memories and language from a quantum state she can no longer reach." It's speculative science verging on science fiction, but it's no more impossible than the documented facts of the case. Behind all the theories and investigations and speculation, there's a human tragedy that's easy to forget. A woman lived and died without anyone knowing her name. Somewhere, presumably, people knew her, perhaps loved her, perhaps wondered what happened to her. Or perhaps not. Perhaps she was as alone in life as she was in death. The people who cared for her in her final months all reported feeling profound sadness about the case, not just the mystery, but the loneliness of it. Nurse Jennifer Holloway, who heard the woman's only words, remained affected by the experience for the rest of her life. In interviews conducted before her death in 2015, she said, "I've always wondered if she was asking us to find her physically, or to find who she was, or to find some part of her that was lost. Those two words haunt me, find me. I feel like we failed her. She reached out just once with everything she had, and we couldn't understand what she needed. That weighs on me." Dr. Chen expressed similar sentiments. As a physician, you accept that you can't save everyone. People die, and sometimes despite your best efforts, you don't know why. But not knowing who someone is, that feels like a different kind of failure. She trusted us with her life, her care, her death, and we couldn't even give her back her name. That's a failure I carried throughout my career. Sheriff Morrison, before his death in 1998, told his daughter, "That case taught me humility. I'd solved murders, found missing persons, tracked down criminals who thought they'd gotten away. I was proud of my record, but I couldn't identify one woman standing in the middle of a road in broad daylight, couldn't tell her family she died, couldn't put a real name on her grave. It reminded me that some mysteries don't have solutions, no matter how hard you work or how much you care. That's a hard lesson." The woman's grave in Burke County Memorial Gardens has become something of a pilgrimage site for people interested in the case. Visitors leave flowers, notes, small tokens. Someone maintains the grave site, keeping it clean and tended, though no one knows who. The notes left at the grave are often poignant. Messages like "You're not forgotten," "I hope you've found peace," "Your name may be lost, but your story lives on." Some visitors leave their own names and locations, as if offering their identity to someone who had none. In 2019, on the 50th anniversary of her death, over 300 people gathered at the grave for a memorial service. They came from across the country, researchers who'd studied the case, true crime enthusiasts who'd been fascinated by the mystery, family members of other missing persons who felt a connection to a woman who died unidentified, and locals who remembered when she'd first appeared and wanted to honor her memory. Reverend Sarah Collins, who conducted the service, said, "We're here because a nameless woman deserves to be remembered, because every life matters, whether or not we know the details, because in honoring her, we honor everyone who's been lost, forgotten, or erased. She may be buried as Jane Doe, but to us, she's a reminder of our common humanity and our responsibility to remember." The service included readings from various religious traditions, music, and an open microphone where people could share thoughts or prayers. Many people spoke about what the case meant to them, how it made them think about identity, about family, about how easily we could all become unknown if circumstances were different. One woman, Margaret Liu, spoke about her own mother who'd survived the Japanese invasion of China and came to America with no documents, no proof of identity, starting her life over with a name she'd chosen herself. This woman's story reminds me that identity is both everything and nothing. Margaret said, "My mother created a new identity and lived a full life. This woman lost hers and couldn't create another. What makes the difference? Luck, circumstance, something deeper? I don't know. But I think about her and my mother together, two women without pasts, but such different outcomes. I pray this woman found peace that she couldn't find here." As of 2024, 5 years after her appearance and death, the case remains officially open but unsolved. Burke County Sheriff's Department maintains the file, now digitized and cross-referenced with multiple databases. DNA samples remain in secure storage, periodically tested against new databases and compared using evolving technology. The case has its own Wikipedia page, multiple podcast episodes, countless blog posts, and YouTube videos analyzing every detail. It's been featured on Unsolved Mysteries, Disappeared, and numerous other true crime programs. It's inspired fiction, novels, short stories, a play, even an independent film that premiered at Sundance in 2022. But despite all the attention, all the investigation, all the theories, no definitive answers have emerged. Current Sheriff Daniel Reeves, who inherited the case when he took office in 2020, remains committed to solving it if possible. "Technology keeps advancing," he says. Genealogy techniques improve, databases expand. Something that seemed impossible to trace 10 years ago might be traceable now. We're not giving up. Someone, somewhere, knows who this woman was. We just have to find them, or them find us. There have been periodic breakthroughs that seemed promising, but ultimately led nowhere. In 2021, a woman in Oregon contacted authorities claiming to be the daughter of a woman who disappeared from her family in 1968 under mysterious circumstances. The physical description matched, the timeline fit. DNA testing was arranged with great hope that finally, after 52 years, the woman would have her name. The DNA didn't match. In 2023, a historical researcher discovered records of a religious commune that had existed in the Appalachian region in the 1960s, operating in complete isolation with no official documentation. Members used no technology, had no interaction with outside authorities, and lived by principles that rejected modern identification systems. The Commune dissolved suddenly in 1969 for unknown reasons, with members scattering. Could the woman have come from there? Investigators tracked down former Commune members. None recognized the woman's description. None had any information about missing members who might match her profile. Another dead end. The most recent development came in early 2024, when advanced artificial intelligence was used to analyze all available footage and photographs of the woman, comparing her facial structure, gait, and physical characteristics against millions of historical photographs from the 1940s through 1960s. The hope was that she might appear in background photos from various locations, a graduation picture, a church gathering, a street scene, anything that might provide context for who she was before she appeared in Burke County. The AI analysis identified 17 potential matches, women in historical photographs who resembled the Jane Doe. Each lead was investigated thoroughly. Each turned out to be someone else, someone identified, someone accounted for. Not her, Dr. Lisa Anderson, a forensic anthropologist working with the latest technology, remains cautiously optimistic. We're developing techniques that would have seemed like magic in 1969. We can extract viable DNA from increasingly degraded samples. We can create three-dimensional facial reconstructions from skeletal remains. We can trace ancestry through genetic markers with incredible precision. Eventually, we might develop techniques that can solve this case, but I also acknowledge we might not. Some mysteries might genuinely be unsolvable, not because we're not smart enough or don't have good enough technology, but because the information simply doesn't exist anywhere to be found. What's perhaps most fascinating about this case is how it challenges our fundamental assumptions about reality, identity, and the nature of existence itself. We assume that everyone comes from somewhere, that everyone has a history, that the continuity of human life means every person is connected to other people, to places, to events that can be traced and documented. But this woman defies those assumptions. She appeared, seemingly from nowhere, in perfect physical health, with no explanation for her presence. She existed for 3 months in a documented, observed, thoroughly examined state. She died and was buried with her DNA preserved and her story recorded in minute detail. And still, we know nothing about her. This case represents a fundamental rupture in what we consider possible, says Dr. Robert Hastings, a philosopher specializing in questions of identity and personhood. We have physical proof this woman existed, medical records, photographs, DNA, a body that was buried. But we have no proof of her existence before September 14, 1969. It's as if she spontaneously generated from nothing, which violates everything we know about human life and biology and causality. Yet the evidence is undeniable. How do we reconcile these contradictions? Some have suggested the woman might represent what could be called an existential anomaly, a person who somehow exists outside the normal causal chains that connect everyone to parents, to birthplaces, to histories, not supernatural necessarily, but beyond our current understanding of how human existence operates. Perhaps, Dr. Hastings suggests, she represents a limitation in our understanding of consciousness and identity. We assume consciousness is firmly rooted in physical bodies that develop in linear time from conception through death. But what if consciousness can occasionally detach from its proper temporal and physical context? What if she was a consciousness that became untethered, materializing in a body on Route 18 with no connection to her origins? It sounds impossible, but her existence is impossible regardless of which explanation we choose. The case has implications for how we think about identity itself. In a world increasingly concerned with digital identity, privacy, and the rights of individuals to control their personal information, this woman represents the opposite extreme, one with no identity at all, despite existing as a physical being. Dr. Helen Torres, an expert in identity law and human rights, has written about the case extensively. We've developed elaborate legal and social systems around the concept of identity. Birth certificates, passports, social security numbers, digital identities, these systems assume that everyone exists within them. But this woman shows us that someone can exist outside all those systems entirely. It raises profound questions. Does a person exist legally if they have no documentation? What rights does someone have if they can't prove who they are? How do we handle the burial and estate of someone who has no identity? These aren't just theoretical questions. This woman actually existed in this state, forcing authorities to grapple with practical implications of existential impossibility. The case also raises questions about memory and what makes us who we are. If this woman did have memories but couldn't access or communicate them, was she still herself? Or had she become someone else entirely? A blank slate consciousness in a body with history that no one could reach. Neurologist Dr. Patricia Grant, who reviewed the medical records in 2019, noted, "Everything about her brain structure appeared normal, yet she couldn't communicate effectively. This suggests the problem wasn't neurological damage but something else, perhaps a disconnect between consciousness and the ability to form and express coherent thoughts." We know consciousness is one of the great mysteries of neuroscience. We don't fully understand how subjective experience arises from brain activity. This woman might represent an extreme case where consciousness existed but couldn't properly interface with memory, language, or self-concept. Essentially, she may have been aware but unable to access the psychological structures that allow for identity. 55 years later, the woman with no name remains exactly that, nameless, historyless, unexplained. Her grave continues to draw visitors. Her case file remains open, and somewhere, perhaps, someone knows who she was, though they've never come forward. Or perhaps not. Perhaps she truly was alone, untethered to anyone, appearing and disappearing from the world without leaving ripples beyond those 3 strange months in 1969. The case reminds us that despite our technological sophistication, our comprehensive databases, our ability to map genomes and trace ancestry, and identify individuals from the smallest DNA samples, some mysteries persist. Some questions have no answers, no matter how thoroughly we investigate. It reminds us that human existence is more fragile and uncertain than we like to believe. We exist in webs of relationships and documentation that confirm our reality, but those webs can break. People can fall through, and when they do, they become ghosts, physically present but socially absent, existing but not mattering in the documented world. The woman's only words, "Find me," echo across the decades as both plea and puzzle. Find her where? Find her how? Find the person she was, the life she'd lived, the name she'd carried, or find something deeper, the explanation for her impossible appearance, the key to her mystery, the truth behind her existence. We haven't found her. Despite everything, despite investigations and DNA analysis and artificial intelligence, and 55 years of accumulated technology and effort, we haven't found her. Perhaps we never will. Or perhaps someday someone will stumble across a piece of information that seems insignificant, an old photograph, a distant family story, a fragment of documentation overlooked for decades, and suddenly everything will click into place. The mystery will unravel. The woman will have her name back. It's happened before. In 2020, a woman whose body was found in rural Tennessee in 1982 was finally identified after 38 years, using genetic genealogy and a single distant cousin match. In 2021, a man found dead in California in 1975 was identified after 46 years. Time doesn't make these cases unsolvable, just harder, requiring patience and luck and technological advancement. So there's hope. Slim, perhaps, but real. Until then, the woman rests under her simple stone in Burke County Memorial Gardens. Her only epitaph the words she struggled so hard to speak, "Find me." And people keep trying. The case has inspired an unusual community researchers, genealogists, true crime enthusiasts, and ordinary people who feel inexplicably drawn to this mystery. They maintain websites, share information, follow up on leads, and keep her memory alive. In a strange way, this nameless woman has more people working to identify her now than she might have had searching for her when she first disappeared from wherever she came from. She's become a symbol, says Jennifer Maxwell, who runs a website dedicated to the case. A symbol of everyone who's lost, forgotten, or unnamed. We keep searching because someone should, because she deserves her name back, because giving up feels like we're abandoning her all over again. Even if we never find the answer, the searching itself matters. It means she mattered. It means she wasn't just a curiosity or a mystery, but a person who deserves to be known. The last photograph ever taken of the woman shows her sitting by the hospital window, looking out at the mountains. Her expression is distant, almost peaceful, as if she was seeing something beyond the physical landscape, perhaps remembering where she came from, or seeing where she was going, or simply existing in that strange state between presence and absence that defined her final months. What was she thinking in that moment? What did she see? What was she trying to tell us with those silent words that moved her lips but never reached her voice? We'll likely never know. The story of the woman with no name remains a disturbing reminder that identity is both more fundamental and more fragile than we imagine. She reminds us that consciousness and existence can become separated from history and context in ways we don't understand. She reminds us that some mysteries resist solution not because we're not clever enough to solve them, but because the information needed simply doesn't exist or can't be accessed. But questions remain, questions that haunt everyone who encounters this case. Who was she really? Where did she come from? What happened to separate her so completely from any traceable history? What was she trying to say with those moving lips? What did she mean by "find me"? And perhaps most disturbing, could this happen again? Could someone else appear from nowhere, untethered from identity and history, as inexplicable as she was? To this day, visitors to Burke County Memorial Gardens report unusual experiences at her grave. Some describe feeling overwhelming sadness, as if the emotion itself is embedded in the location. Others report hearing whispers, faint, indistinct, but definitely present, though no one else is nearby. A few have reported seeing a woman in a dark blue dress standing among the graves at dusk, though she vanishes when approached. Coincidence, imagination, or something else, perhaps the echo of an existence that never quite found its proper place in our reality. And on silent nights, when fog rolls through the mountains and obscures the familiar landmarks of Burke County, when Route 18 stretches dark and empty between pools of streetlight, people still report seeing her, a woman in a dark blue dress, standing in or beside the road, her lips moving in silent speech. Sometimes she looks directly at passing vehicles. Sometimes she seems unaware of them, but she's always described the same way: distant, sad, impossibly present yet fundamentally absent. Find me 2 words, a plea, a puzzle, a challenge that remains unanswered 5 years later. If this journey through one of America's most disturbing unsolved mysteries has resonated with you, if you find yourself pondering questions about identity, existence, and how easily we could all become unknown if circumstances shifted, then consider subscribing to this channel. There are many more stories waiting to be told, mysteries buried in time that deserve to be examined, lives that demand to be remembered, questions that refuse to be silenced. Leave a like if this account has provoked reflections that go beyond mere entertainment, and comment sharing your own perspectives. Do you think this woman will ever be identified? What explanation makes the most sense to you? Have you encountered cases of people who seem to exist outside normal identity systems? And if you know anything at all about a woman who might match this description, who went missing around 1968 or 1969, who had connections to North Carolina or the Appalachian region, please contact Burke County Sheriff's Department. After 55 years, even the smallest piece of information might be the key that finally solves this enduring mystery. Until next time, remember, every person has a story, a name, a life that matters. Some stories are just harder to hear than others. Some voices whisper from silence, and it's our responsibility to listen.